Do not disturb. So
And we are live, my
we're
friend.
live. We're doing our thing this morning. Karen, good morning.
Welcome everybody to the January 27th edition of Collect Our Cousins. I am so honored and delighted that Eric Ward is joining us today, and I encourage folks, I know there's a lot of people watching, please do send us your questions and comments and we will get to them. Before we start, I just want to share my little preamble about why I created Collect Our Cousins, engaging white Americans in the struggle for full democracy. I created this show to help white Americans like me become more effective in our conversations with white people in our lives, to help us build an embodied anti-racist white culture, in the words of Resma Menachem. I'm featuring the people who inspire and teach me the most. White Americans, the battle for our democracy will not be won in courtrooms or in the streets. It must be won in white living rooms, at our dinner tables, in our neighborhood meetings, boardrooms, school board meetings. As an anti racist, collecting my cousins often falls to the last on my to do list. Oh, I'll get to that next month. But I want to encourage everyone who cares about this to move it to the first of our to do list. Write a list of your friends, family you will collect this year. Think about every white group you are a part of and what you can do within that group to collect people. There are 21 million white Americans largely who believe that Donald Trump is the legit president and political violence may be necessary. And they are part of the mainstream. So we must mainstream anti racism just as forcefully. And when I say those words, the person who I think of first actually is Eric Ward, because that is the work that he is engaged in, that he's dedicated his entire career to, and his many accolades. But he is the founder and executive director of the Western State Center, and also a part of the Southern Poverty Law Center, international award recipient, author, blogger. Follow Western State Center on Medium. And I'm just so grateful for you making time today, Eric. And I want to start with, you wrote a post in January about the big lie. And you said, we all talk about this big lie. And then you talked about there's another big lie that is equally pernicious that we need to stop believing.
I did. I wrote a piece. First of all, it's great to see you, my friend. It's wonderful to be on here, and I'm seeing folks popping up, Carrie, and I'm looking forward to the conversation here. Good morning, Latasha. Um, so much respect and love to you. Such a hero. I wish he was up here talking with
We'll
us.
get you on, Latasha, definitely.
Yeah, everyone, please support Black Voters Matters and the great leadership down in Georgia. But Karen, it's my friend. It has been a long, hard 4 years. My dad turned 96 this year, though, and he
Mm,
reminds me that it has been a long 96 years, right? And
mm,
the truth is we live in a society that struggles around racism. And I'm going to say racism a lot of times because I read this study that even saying the word racism evokes anxiety in us, right? And so I'm just going to say it: racism, 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 racism. Look, the earth did not crack in half by saying it. We can talk about, we're going to talk about it today. But look, a year ago on January 6th, we saw the attempted takeover of American democracy, the destruction of American democracy. We sometimes get cynical about American democracy because it hasn't lived up, right, to its aspirations. But American democracy has evolved over time and largely, right, through the struggle of African Americans, right, in indigenous populations, right, and other allies over the years. But American democracy, if it is inclusive in any form, if it is people centered, if it is accountable, it is because African Americans, largely through struggle, right, the resistance to slavery, the resistance to Jim Crow, the resistance, right, to the emergence of American apartheid, right, have stood ground against it. It is also true that the majority of Americans also reject the idea of a white-only ethno-state, reject, right, the idea of white supremacy, the idea that white people are superior and everyone else is inferior based off of skin color, right? And so we have to understand that American democracy is on the cusp of becoming an inclusive American democracy. As I said, people centered, multiracial, right, with an eye towards accountability and transparency. This is why, for over 5 years, we have watched a growing assault on American democracy that culminated on January 6th. But look, Donald Trump can swear all day and all night that the elections were stolen, right? The data speaks for itself, right? The majority of people being charged for election fraud are Republicans, right? Let's be clear. Those who are restricting the rights of Americans to speak right now are the GOP at the state level. If elections are being stolen, it's not being stolen by those who choose to vote under terrible conditions, right? It is under assault by those who do not want every vote to count in our society. And that's the big lie that is functioning. But there's another lie that Trumpism and others have been pushing, and it is the lie of despair. They have convinced us that we are losing, and we're not losing. We are not powerless in this moment, not in small or big ways. Let us be clear about one thing, and this is why I push back against the what I call the sin of despair, right? The lie of despair, the lie of pessimism, right? 4 years of continual assault on American democracy, right? Multiracial democracy in the United States. And it has still stood, right, after these 4 brutal years. And it stood because of amazing folks like LaTosha Brown and those she works with each and every day in Georgia, right? Black women helped save democracy in the United States, and they did so, right, in the state of Georgia. But here's the other piece that's very interesting. When you start slicing the votes of white women, what you see is that in key places, white women stood against racism and bigotry, and they also stood and defended democracy. So that tells us something here, right? I'm not here to say that white society overwhelmingly voted for a multiracial society. What I'm saying is that after 75 years of civil rights struggle, more white people in America today support Black Lives Matter, right? Supports Black Voters Matter, supports the movement for Black lives, right? Supports Black folks, their neighbors, their friends, right? Than ever supported Martin Luther King Jr. in his lifetime, right? More Americans support Black Lives Matter than they supported the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The idea that we are not advancing multiracial democracy is a lie. The reason we know it's a lie, right, is that if we hadn't been so successful, we wouldn't be under attack right now. That's the proof. And we have to get rid of this despair. And that's what I was trying to get folks to understand. We can't give up the fight before it even happens.
Thank you so much. And sometimes I get so discouraged that 55% of white women voted for Trump in 2020, up from 2016. And I lose sight of the fact that there are significant numbers of white women who are breaking away and who are establishing a new pattern for ourselves, particularly among millennials and Gen Z. But the battle for the hearts and minds of Gen Z in particular is very robust. When you look at how the right has invested in Prager University, all these different things. And I want to share with you that on Saturday morning, my workout, the end of my workout coincided with the beginning of the March for Life here in San Francisco. And so I stuck around and I just wanted to observe what was going on at this March for Life. And it was very interesting. First of all, it was incredibly well resourced. They must have spent tens of thousands of dollars. They had buses, matching t-shirts, elaborate sound system, porta potties. I mean, this was a big production, clearly organized by someone with a lot of money and experience. And the vibe was celebratory. The vibe was exultant. The vibe was very welcoming. Like I felt very comfortable there, even though my views are, 180 diametrically opposed. But what was really interesting to me was how it kicked off. It kicked off with a series of women going up and sharing their stories of having had an abortion and deeply regretting it, and how the abortion had been a trauma that they were still suffering from, and that their motive for trying to prevent other women from having abortions was to save them from the pain that they went through. And as I was listening to that, I was contrasting that with some of the messaging when we get together as the anti-racist movement. I say all this to say, what type of messaging have you found to be particularly effective at engaging white people who may be on the fence or even, hold opposing views? How can we reach people in a way that's going to turn them on and make them want to feel a part of the anti-racist movement?
Yeah, look, we're in a really a tough moment. I think we almost have to go back in time, right? You said something very profound, right? And I want to stick with this for a second, and I promise I'm going to answer this question. 55% of white women voted for Donald Trump. 45% of white women did not vote for Donald Trump. Folks ask me all the time, can you believe 55% of white women voted for Donald Trump? And my response, honestly, I want to be honest about this. We're having a serious conversation. I came up with you, my friend, because I know we can have these conversations, which is I'm astonished that in the United States, right, 500 years of white supremacist socialization, that 45% of white women were still strong enough to reject that socialization
Mm,
and vote for their humanity, right?
mm,
That's super powerful, right? And that's the proof of the work that is happening in the society. If we don't understand how profound that 45% number is,
mm.
right? We don't have an understanding of how racism has functioned in our society. So I'm going to go a little bit further, right? We forget that the construction of white supremacy, and I want everyone to take a big breath right now, right? Again, we said one of those big words that causes anxiety, white supremacy. But look, none of us were here when white supremacy was set up. It didn't start in the US. Interesting enough, right? White supremacy takes formation in the Iberian Peninsula, right? As Jews were being racialized, right? The anti-Semitism plays a role in the formation of white supremacy, this idea, right, that white people are superior, right, biologically, this idea of that there are biological definitions of racism, and that on the other side of the spectrum are Black people is inferior, and that everyone is lined up in the middle. That is an idea that develops in Europe. It comes to the United States, and then it gets systematized because people find that it is a powerful way, right, to both order society, right, and to reinforce inequality, right? It becomes a form of social control. We often think of white supremacy merely, right, as and I don't say merely in a small way, but merely around the concept of chattel slavery, right? The exploitation of Black people, free labor, right? But it also included the stolen resources, right? And lives of Native people. And the third piece we often don't talk about, my friend, is that the third pillar of white supremacy was misogyny, right? It was
Mm.
about the control of women and sexuality. And when we understand that those are the three pillars, we understand that in the society right now, that is those who are rejecting a multiracial American democracy, right, are clinging back to some of the past pillars, right?
Mm.
Increasing attacks on African Americans. That's what the backlash against Black Lives Matters was, right? The framing of Black Lives Matters as some dangerous violent movement, right? The attacks on critical race theory, right? The Virginia governors straight up dog whistling, right? To
Mm.
stay in power by attacking Black people. We see the attacks on indigenous people. We have not been able to keep one treaty to save our lives in this country, right? We have promises to keep. We signed treaties with nations, right? How are people supposed to think we are a nation that keeps our promises when we can't even hold our treaties here in the United States? And the third piece, right, is this attack on women. We all know, right, that the control of society is largely the control of women, right? And this third piece was very real. James Baldwin, others have articulated this better than me. So it's not surprising we're seeing attacks on racial attacks on people of color. It's not surprising we're seeing the rollback of environmental laws and consternations about native, sovereign nations acting with their sovereign power, right? With treaties we've signed, right? That's the anti-Native American backlash, the attacks on tribal sovereignty. But it's not also surprising that we're seeing attacks on abortion, right? On women's reproductive health, right? It is about controlling women in society. And look, we've seen it before. It's interesting that immediately after the victories of the 1960s civil rights movement, which overturned, right, white supremacy is the rule of law. Now, look, I'm not here saying white supremacy doesn't exist, so please don't side tweet me saying Eric Ward said white supremacy doesn't exist. What I'm saying is the 1960s civil rights movement, right, successfully removed white supremacy, right, has the single lens upon which we understand our country and upon which we understand ourselves, right? It created a competing narrative, one that is multiracial and one that centers our humanities and our aspirations, right? The right to live, love, worship, and work free from fear and bigotry. But soon after those civil rights victories, we began to experience this backlash known as white nationalism. And I think without surprise, right, the first attacks, the first backlashes were the resegregation of public education, right,
Mm.
and the attack on women's reproductive rights. And
Mm.
here we are in 2021, 2022, the United States of America, right? And what are we watching? Attacks on public education and the attacks on women's reproductive rights. Look, I tell women, wake up, understand, right, that the defeat of white supremacy is not about anti-whiteness. It's not about punishing white people. It's about creating a path for America to recognize each other's humanity so that we can move forward together. We don't do that by restricting people's rights. We don't do that by creating systems of discrimination. We trust our people and we trust the opportunity. And so we have to push back. It's not surprising we see white nationalists mobilizing out there. It's not surprising to see the cynical GOP tapping into those anxieties. I have really heartfelt for anyone who is experiencing trauma for any reason, right? But we don't get to project our traumas onto other people and decide our laws based off of what happened to me as an individual. We are a society, and women fundamentally have the right and control over their own bodies, right? And that is something I am willing to lay across the road for, and all of us should. It is, we cannot separate from the fight against racism. We are talking about people having the control of their own lives, right? And we have to push back against all of it, whether it's targeting women, Jews, people with disabilities, African Americans, immigrants, or others. We all have to stand up together in this moment.
Thank you so much for that, Eric. And I want to direct listeners. Last week, my guest was Rebecca Giacomantonio, who is a millennial white woman. And we had a very robust conversation about white women and our whole role in white supremacy. We were literally imported to this country as tobacco brides to reproduce. The unit of reproduction of white supremacy is the white home. And that has been our role since 1619, from the time we first came here, to have the white heirs and educate them in this system to keep it rolling. And I just want to encourage white women to break away from that. And also that all of the rights we have as white women came from Black people, right? We would not have protection from employment discrimination. We would not have equal wages. We would not have protection from sexual harassment in the workplace if it were not for Black people. So let's be buddies. Let's understand who truly cares about us and unite with them instead of these other folks, because this is the most violent of all the wealthy societies, all the rich countries. The United States is the most dangerous for women across every spectrum: domestic violence, sexual violence, childbirth, and of course, it's the most dangerous for Black women and women of color. So, but I want to come back to the other part of that question, which is messaging.
Yeah,
How do
yeah,
we engage folks?
yeah. Look, let me be straight. I attended my first white nationalist meeting, right? I think that's important to say. I walked into my first white nationalist meeting nearly a little over 30 years ago, right? In the middle of, outside of Salem, Oregon, in the middle of the state of Oregon, right? On a fairground. I can tell you, I was the only person of color in that grouping. And I learned something powerful that day, right? The first thing I learned, right, is that uh, Nazis, right, white nationalists, racists, right, they're not monsters in our closet, right?
Mhm.
They are, they're not under our beds. They're folks we work alongside with, we go to school with, we work in the grocery store, worship alongside. And we have to understand, right, that at the end of the day, these are people who have chosen a different worldview. And often the fallacy is that if we just approach them and just tell them that their worldview is wrong, they will understand, right? It's a very evangelical approach, right? This idea that we can save people. Look, people have all kinds of worldviews. When I drop salt, I still throw salt over my shoulder, right? Not because it's just habit, right? It's hard for me not to do it. I get nervous when I don't do it. It produces anxiety. And so we have to understand, I'm not comparing the worldviews. One certainly has more damage than the other. But what I'm saying is we have to stop with this idea of conversion. It's not our job to convert people. It's our
Mm,
job to provide an alternative, right, to
mm,
this idea, right, that the bigotry that is killing you, right, is the best idea out there. Because let's be clear, right, racism kills white people. Just like it kills people of color. And it injures white people just like it injures people of color. You've just been socialized not to see it. Look at the suicide rates in this country, right? Look at the poverty rates in this country. Look at the lack of opportunity and the burden of debt, right, that white children are growing under, right? And you don't even know to be outraged about it because you've been told, right, that it's the fault of other people rather than a
mm.
system that we can adjust and change if we choose to. That's our choice, right? We're not victims in this moment. We can actually choose the type of society we want to live in. So to come back to the messaging, look, you can't yell at people, about, you can't call someone a racist, uh, 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 it's never going to start off the conversation well, right? We have to understand that at the end of the day, right, we have all been socialized generationally to see each other in very specific ways. Again, that's the way the society was constructed. None of us are responsible for the construction, but we all get to choose, right, how we now walk through that moment. So conversations, right, need to be observations. I often say it's more important to talk about what is racism rather than who is the racist, right? I
Mm.
think it is more important, right, to focus on solutions, right, to racism rather than focusing on what did an individual do wrong,
Mm.
right? Again, we can't be surprised that folks function in racist and sexist manners in our society. It's why we want to adjust systems. Lots of folks used to love to drive around drinking in open containers without seat belts, right? Without exhaust on their cars, right? They felt okay. We didn't know better. We didn't
Mm.
understand, right? And it took time for us to be educated, but laws needed to be put in place, right, to protect the larger society. And it's the same way around racism. It's not that we can't overcome it. It's that it isn't completely just based off of individual behavior. So I say, right, when we enter these conversations, let's be clear. Are we talking about personal grievance, something an individual did to me? Then I need to have that conversation with that individual. Are we talking about a systemic problem? And we should be clear when we're talking about racism, right, that we focus on one or the other in a specific conversation. We can't have both conversations at the same time. It's too confusing. The second is to lead with compassion and curiosity.
Mm.
Don't automatically assume a person has any understanding of what it means. Here comes the hard part. Here's the hard part, particularly for folks of color. And it's hard to say, right? But the fact of the matter is we can't fight racism without experiencing it. And that's completely unfair, right? We can't engage white folks without experiencing racism. We sometimes can't engage one another without experiencing racism. That's just the socialization of society. It means to fight racism. We have to be willing to make that sacrifice. And it's an unfair sacrifice to ask folks, but it is what it's going to take to continue to push this forward. But look, it's not the sole responsibility of people of color to speak to racism, right? We
Say
are
that
doing
again,
so.
Eric.
It is not the responsibility nor the sole responsibility of Black people or people of color to speak to racism, right? We need white folks to be courageous and begin to point it out. We need white folks to be practicing what it looks like to have conversations on racism. And look, I'm going to be honest. We need white folks not to turn anti racism into a religion, right? And what I mean by that is it's not a spirituality, it's not a political ideology. Anti racism is a value, meaning
Mm.
anyone, right? Even Republicans, I know Republicans who are actually anti racist. They don't vote Republican right now, but they are anti racist. And I mean that, right?
Mm.
In every way. And we have to understand, right, that at the end of the day, right, if white people take anti-racism and turn it into a subculture, right, or a special club, right, rather than an expansive set of work, right, that proves humanity, we are going to continue to find ourselves in this moment. We need white folks to look outward, right? Understanding racism isn't just about personal development. It's important. It makes you a better individual. But this is about transforming our society. This is about taking the sacrifice of 75 years of civil rights struggle in
Mm.
this country. 75 years ago, people didn't have a choice, right? There was no contested terrain. They had to do this under the specter of Jim Crow. People were killed at numbers we don't even understand. And yet, those folks, those ancestors have brought us to this very point, to the point where almost the majority of America, right? The majority of America says we want a multiracial democracy. Let's don't throw it away, right? We don't throw it away by saying these are the good white people and these are the bad white people. And that's what's happening, sadly, within our spaces. So look, let's get it correct. Let's get it correct, right? This is about engagement and the transformation of systems. Engagement means other people, difficult conversations. Don't come talk to me about racism. I already understand it. Talk to your neighbor. That's who they need. If you need encouragement, if you need some ideas, please come to me, right? But the work doesn't take place internally. We can't be monks in this moment. We have a country that desperately needs us. People are living in fear. People don't understand what the future holds. And we have to step up and step forward. And we can't do that without that white base, right? We need you all to join the struggle for democracy, or at least try it. Give it a shot.
Thank you so much for that, Eric. And I want to encourage white folks not to engage in the I can make white people feel worse than you can Olympics. As a past medalist in the I can make white people feel worse than you can Olympics, I can attest that this is not the right strategy. The right strategy is welcome, sinner. I have sinned too, and to your point, it's not about a religion, but we can learn a lot, I think, from like those speeches that the women who had abortions were giving. Even though I was completely diametrically opposed, there is no way I could not listen to their story, right? There's no way I could not see their humanity, and that was what is true for them. And when we can talk like that, when we can admit, I've done racist things, I continue to do racist things. It is deeply embedded in me. And I also am working on it. And I am also advocating for policy change. And I know that that policy change is not only going to benefit people of color, it's going to benefit me and it will benefit you. As you were talking about all the despair out there, the despair is in the Trump country, right? The counties that voted for Trump, decreasing life expectancy due to suicide, overdose, alcoholism, lack of access to medical care, et cetera, et cetera. The despair is real.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, right? Are we so conditioned? Have we been so trained, right, that we are willing to watch our seniors, right, our family members, like our neighbors, succumb, right, because of racism? We've been so trained to believe, right, that in the society that our problem is just some minorities, right? That's what we're taught, right? All of us, right? Even people of color are socialized in this way, right? It manifests differently, but it's important. It is on a spectrum, and they have us so fixated, like it's like Pavlov's dog, right? You ring the bell, you blow the dog whistle, and we start salivating in ways that we don't even notice, right? That we're being killed by toxics in our communities, right? Because they have us focused on immigrants who might be working, right? And investing in America. We don't care that our seniors are basically warehoused, right? In buildings, right? For 10, 12 years, the last 10, 12 years of their lives, right? Because people have us focused on African Americans. The distraction of racism is killing the United States. It's why I often say, Racism is the national security issue in the United States. It's the greatest national security issue. It is dividing our country at a time where we need to be aligned under a time of great crisis, right? We have watched it leave democracy vulnerable on January 6th, right? We watched law enforcement, over 150 law enforcement officers physically injured on January 6th, right? Caught completely unprepared, right? And not even in riot gear, right? Even though for weeks white nationalists said they were coming, right? And they were coming to overthrow the United States. Caught unsurprised. And we can see the racism in it because we saw the reaction to actually peaceful Black Lives Matters protests, right? On the streets of DC in full riot gear, super aggressive, firing rubber bullets. That is racism, my friends. And it left all of us vulnerable. But I will say this, I know I'm rambling here now a little bit, but I do want to say this. The narratives being told are critically important. And so the way we do have these conversations, right, is we have to understand you don't want to have a debate. If you're debating someone around racism in any debate, all you do when you argue, right, is you help another person get stronger in their debating skills. You don't change them. That's what we see on social media all the time. When people argue with me on social media and you see me trying to argue back, all I'm doing is practicing. There's just a point I decided I wanted to get better at. And there's someone trolling me and I thought, well, why don't I make it useful? Right? And test it out. That's also what's happening in real life. So we have to stop with the debates, right? And what we have to get to is start trying to understand, if you're going to have conversations around racism, is try to understand what people's values are first, right? What are the values that drive them in life? And spend some time first just trying to understand that from that group or from that individual. And once you understand those values, try to understand do you have any value alignments, right? Are there values you have in common? And if you have values in common, why don't you have a discussion around how that value has led you, right, to speak out against racism and why, right? And ask them how that same value, right? What does that same value mean for them? You may not get them moving, but you'll get them thinking, right? And you'll break down this idea that the white nationalist movement, the strategy that they've engaged in, right, is to turn everything into some kind of political partisan debate. And there's nothing partisan about racism and fighting racism. It's just the human thing to do. And it's just people trying to be human.
Oh, I love that so much, Eric. And I also want to refer to our very first Collect Our Cousins on January 6th, where Dr. David Campt and I engaged in conversation. And what you just described is 100% what Dr. David Campt, who is an expert in persuasion, and it's called agreement before conflict. Like, you do not, the first words out of your mouth are not, you are a racist. The first words out of your mouth is, tell me about how that's true for you. And it's all about having that values conversation. That's true for me too. This is how it manifests in my life. And in addition, this is how it leads me to have these beliefs around anti-racism, right? So you're not judging, you're not labeling, you're not anything, you are engaging. Oh my gosh, the time is flowing by. We have so many.
Is it? It's going so fast. Let's
tell me about what gives you hope, what you see working in the work of the Western State Center around combating white nationalism.
Yeah. So Western State Center, when I came to Western State Center, I had one single proposition. I had a thesis, right? And my thesis was this, that white folks could stand against white nationalism, and not based off of any idea of allyship or solidarity, but because they saw it in their own self-interest to do so, right? That was our proposition. And that that constituency would not rebel against all Black leadership, right, in that multiracial struggle. So Western State Center is a multiracial organization. It is Black led, right? Our entire board is made up of Black women, right? But we are a multiracial organization that focuses on the idea, right, that it is neither strategic or more, or neither is it moral to completely abandon white America to this fight, right? The white nationalist movement doesn't just get them by default, right? They don't get any humans by default. And so we have engaged over the last 4 years, right, engaging those constituencies. And it's not easy, right? It's across the political spectrum. So what makes me proud, I think, has been the reception of that, right? That these are folks who are coming into the network who don't just want to learn about racism, right? Learn about white nationalism and discuss it. They want to do something about it. And I'm inspired in so many ways. Here in Oregon, right before the January 6th insurrection in DC, there was an attempted insurrection here in Oregon where a state legislator planned, right, so coordinated, and then participated in letting a mob into the state capitol. There was a physical confrontation with state police, and then he tried to do it on the sly. He opened one door to let folks in and then walked around all the way to the under end of the entrance, around the building and in, and took back his seat as if no one would notice. Well, look, he was expelled from the Oregon legislature, and only one person didn't vote for his expulsion. That was him, meaning every Democrat, every Republican, right, expelled him. It is the first time in history, right, a sitting legislator has ever been expelled. But look, here is what we tell folks, right? It tells us, right, that we can hold these folks accountable, right? And let's be clear, right? Oregon is 85% white. That means, right, white folks mobilized against white nationalists, right, and were victorious. Look, I think groups, it's not just groups like Western State Center, right? It's the vote folks protecting the vote. It's folks trying to bring accountability to the internet, right, and to social media platforms. It is the folks trying to ensure that election workers are protected, right, in the upcoming elections. You see it each and every day. It brings me hope because 30 years ago, right, when I went to that white nationalist meeting, right, and for all the years after, until about 5 years ago, when we told folks like me, Loretta Ross, Eric Ward, Suzanne Farrs, right, the Mab Seagresses, the Leonard Zeskins, I can say these names all day. But when we used to tell folks that there was a problem coming to America, folks would roll their eyes. It was hard to understand, right? But everyone understands it now. 5 years ago, there used to be a dozen organizations that understood this, and maybe 1,000 people. But today, right, today there are thousands of organizations pushing back against white supremacy and trying to manage, right, and manage this white nationalist threat. There are hundreds of thousands of people, right, at the national level and at the local level. What gives me hope is that the anti-bigotry, right, anti-bigotry used to be a small sector. It is now a field, and it is on the verge of being a pro-democracy movement in this country. And so I guess what gives me hope about Western State Center is, look, 4 years after the assault on democracy and continual attacks, government still stands. Democracy still leans towards justice. And what gives me hope now is that there's tens of thousands of other organizations ready to carry on the next 4 years in the United States. we're moving forward. We're going to get to the top of this mountain.
Mhm. Thank you, Eric. Oh my God. Thank you so much. I just have one final question for you, but before
Yeah.
I get to that, I want to invite all our viewers to join us. So I have been doing these on Thursday mornings at 8 a.m. Pacific, but next week for the kickoff of Black History Month, we're moving to February 1st. That's Tuesday at 2 o'clock. My guest is going to be Kafre J, the executive director of Hip Hop for Change, and a powerful, powerful organizer and cultural producer, like just an incredible human being. So
Yes.
I'm super excited. Join us on February 1st, 2 o'clock for the next of this series. Eric, my final, and there's so many comments and
Yeah.
questions in here. I wish we had time for them. We'll have to do a part two. My final question for you is if you could wave a magic wand and get white people to either start doing something or stop doing something, what would it be?
Okay, if I could get them to start doing something, just start talking about race out loud. Just if you could just say the word racism and race, and keep exposing people that it's okay to say these words and have these conversations. They're happening anyway, right? In private, but it's okay to have these in public and not in the way that the white nationalist movement is having it, right? So that's the one thing, really. That's what I would say. The one thing I would stop doing, and I would just include all of us in there. Let us all stop ignoring Georgia. Uh, Georgia did a profound thing for this country, did a profound thing for all of us in this country, and no good deed goes unpunished in white supremacy. And Georgia and the leaders there and the communities there are deserving of our attention, resources, and support right now, right? And we have to show up for them. And right, I'm not saying all of us need to go to Georgia. They probably don't want us all to come to Georgia, but find one thing, right? One thing in 2022 that you can do for folks in Georgia,
Mm.
right? And do that. So let us stop ignoring Georgia. It may be the birthplace of America's multiracial democracy. So let's lean in and let's be part of that history in ways that are appropriate.
Thank you so much, Eric. How can people follow your work and keep in touch
Yeah.
with you?
Yeah, folks can find me at Bulldog Shadow, all one word, on Twitter. That's the best way to find me. It's my pro wrestling name. When I was 7, I wanted to be a pro wrestler, and that was going to be my pro net wrestling name. And Twitter is about the closest I come to pro wrestling now. So find me there if you have questions. Would love to continue the conversation. So great to see you, my friend. Everyone, again, pick up, right? We're not having these conversations because we're losing. Trust me.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. So many amazing comments on here and just amazing people
Okay.
in this conversation. James Rucker, thank you for joining us. Dialogue, not debate. Thank you for this important discussion. Dialogue, vulnerability. Share your story. How did anti-racism liberate you? How has it made your life better? Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, come join us again on February 1st, everybody. Really, really appreciate it. Bye, Eric. Thank you so
Bye,
much
my
for all
friend.
the wisdom.
Anytime.
Okay, bye.